Liz Davila is a consultant and former chairman and CEO of Vissix Incorporated. She served as chairman. Vissix is a worldwide leader in laser vision correction technology, and she served as the CEO and chairman until its acquisition by Advanced Medical Optics in May of 2005. Liz joined Vissix in 1995 and became chairman and CEO in 2001. She is now a member of the board of Advanced Medical Optics. Prior to joining Vissix, Ms. Davila spent 18 years at Syntex Corporation in senior management positions in its medical devices, medical diagnostics, and pharmaceutical division. In addition to the MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business, which she earned in 1977, Liz holds an MS in biochemistry from the University of Notre Dame. And before entering the MBA program, Ms. Davila taught high school chemistry in New York and in Ecuador. So please join me in welcoming Liz to our panel. Deborah Zomo is currently the Vice President and General Counsel here at Stanford University and is responsible for the legal work at Stanford, as well as for Stanford Hospitals and Clinics and the Lucile Packard Children's Hospital. Ms. Zomo received her JD from Stanford Law School in 1979. And she has served as a court-appointed arbitrator in San Francisco Superior and Santa Clara County Courts. She's the past president of the Santa Clara Bar Association, and she is an officer and director of the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley and the Silicon Valley Campaign for Legal Services. She's also a trustee of the American University of Afghanistan and director of the Academy of Art University. She's been a faculty member at the Federal Practice Program, Northern District of California, and lectures at University of Santa Clara School of Law, Stanford Law School, the National Association of College and University Attorneys, and other programs. So please join me in welcoming Deborah. Next is Patty Hart. Patty most recently served as chairman and CEO of Pinnacle Systems, a leading provider of digital video solutions for beginners to broadcasters. She previously served as chairman and CEO of Excite at Home, the leader in residential broadband services. And she also served as the chairman, president, and CEO of Telocity, and as a member of its board of directors from June 1999 through its sale to DirecTV in April of 2001. Telocity is a provider of high-speed broadband internet services. Prior to joining Telocity, Hart was at Sprint Corporation as president and chief operation officer of Sprint's long distance division, and oversaw all operational aspects of the division, which provides voice and data communications products and services to Sprint customers. She also served on the advisory council to the Global One joint venture with France Telecom and Deutsche Telekom. Hart is a member of the board of directors for Korn Ferry International, Spansion Incorporated, Lin TV Corporation, and International Game Technology. And previously she served on the boards of Plantronics, Vantiv Corp., Earthlink, and Premises Corporation, and she holds a BS in Marketing and Economics from Illinois State University. So please join me in welcoming Patty. Finally, John Thompson serves currently as the Vice Chairman, Global CEO and Board Practice at Heidrick & Struggles, and is recognized as one of the most respected CEO and board recruiters in the nation. With 24 years in the executive search industry, his public company clients have included Amazon, Autodesk, Blockbuster, Cadence, Computer Associates, Dell, Google, Intuit, Juniper Networks, Oracle, Sabre, Salesforce.com, SAP, Soltron, Symbol, and Walt Disney. Just looking at that whole list, it's impressive. John has been active in working with both public and private boards in recruiting new directors, as well as consulting on major board restructuring projects. His recent directorship clients include Adobe, Autodesk, Juniper Networks, Sabre, SanDisk, Seagate, Symantec, and Thompson. John was recently recognized by Businessweek in 2008 as one of the 50 most influential search consultants in the world, as well as being featured in Career Maker's North America's Top Executive Recruiters and the Global 2000 Executive Recruiters Guide. And he's frequently featured in Businessweek, Forbes, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal to discuss CEO assessment in particular and CEO selection. John joined Heidrick & Struggles in 1999 as a partner and previously was a partner with a regional executive search firm. He's also former corporate director of organizational development for Atari. And he received his Bachelor of Arts degree in economics and a Master of Business Administration at Virginia Tech University. So please join me in welcoming John to our board. What I thought I'd do is I'd start us off by asking a couple of questions of the panelists, and then we'll open it up for general questions from the audience. We do have microphones, so if you're interested in asking a question in a few minutes, just raise your hand. And where's Lynn and Mike? Yeah, we'll find you. Okay. So the first question, would love to get your reaction to the research. Tell us about your experience on and with corporate boards.
I'll jump in.
You jump in. You jump in, Liz. Thank you.
Sitting here at the end here, I'll jump in.
Okay.
Well, first of all, the research I found very interesting. The data showing better performance of companies with more women on boards is nice to see. As it was pointed out, that's not necessarily causality, but it's still very interesting. And I asked myself, why might this be? And a couple of reasons popped into my head. One, from my perspective over my career of 30-plus years, I do believe that women who make it to the top of organizations, generally speaking, have to be better than men who make it to the top of organizations on average. It's harder for us to get to the top. And so it may be that the women on boards are to some extent more qualified just because their entire careers they've had to be on that edge of excellence, that therefore makes them better overall business people and perhaps better able to contribute on a board. Another reason, and I think that Evelyn alluded to this, is that as I see it, I see women on boards perhaps because they're not part of an old boys network where everyone pats everyone else on the back in the meeting. By definition, feel more ready to challenge ideas that have been part of the fabric of a company perhaps forever, perhaps for several years. And so I do see women as more likely to step forward in many cases and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we ought to take a look at this another way. And if this is the case, this certainly could add to the better improvement, better performance of a company. I also believe, and from what I've seen, I think women can often bring a more fundamental level of common sense to discussions. And even in the boardroom of Fortune 500 companies, that often, as I see it, is a missing ingredient. And the discussion can get into a level of that gets very ethereal. And I think it is not unusual to find that a woman might be the one most likely to say, hey, wait a minute. Are we missing something pretty basic here, and get a discussion focused in an area that perhaps is of greater benefit to solving a problem?
Thank you. I would agree with everything that Liz said, which she said very eloquently. And I just say, in my experience, the women are different sometimes on boards. And I'll just tell you one little anecdote. I was asked to consult with this new university that was starting up in Afghanistan, and advise them on corporate governance and what it means to be a board. And a majority of the members of this board were Afghan, but they were being funded by the U.S. government and needed to operate like a U.S. company. And so I went to Kabul and I met with them and I explained all this to them. And a lot of these concepts are really foreign to a number of these businessmen. And then I said, and I think, very importantly, you're starting up a coeducational institution in this country, and you don't have a single woman on your board, and you need to fix that. And there was this silence, and I thought, well, I'm never going to hear from them again. And then, of course, I ended up being on the board. But yeah, you have to be careful what you ask for sometimes. So, but I just see that, and we now have some other women on the board as well, and it's really changed the dynamic of the discussion. I think brought really just a very different perspective, and honestly, to say nothing against the men, and men, all my mentors have been men because they've been really honestly the people in positions to help me. But the women are the real go-getters, and they're the ones out there, doing the fundraising and bringing in the money, and it's great to see that. But I do think that having women on boards can really change the dynamic. I think largely because they are still to a large extent they're outsiders and not part of the fabric of the way things have always been. And I think that's a good thing for any organization.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things. First of all, I think Evelyn mentioned the number of seats in the boardroom that are currently held by women, or the average number. And I would say that my experience in the boardroom is that the impact women have far exceeds the seat at the table. It happens almost in every situation. And sometimes that's good. And sometimes it's because we allow them to assign us all the duties. So we do tend to take on a little more, because I think that we're still in the formative stages of participating as women. And so you have a little bit of a tendency to kind of want to earn their favor and do a little bit more. And I think to a certain degree that's good. That allows you to kind of break through. So, I think that's kind of an important thing to think about. I've had the luxury, sometimes I think I'm crazy, but I've had the luxury of participating in 12 public company boards in my career. And I will tell you the interesting thing, in being a woman in the boardroom as an independent director is very different than being the only woman in the boardroom that's the CEO and chairman. It's a very different kind of reaction that you get. If you're the chairman and CEO, they kind of treat you like one of the guys. They beat up on you, they're tough on you, and whatever. When you're the independent director, they're very nice to you. It's very kind of interesting. It's a very different role. They seem to be more open, in my mind. Everybody seems to be more open to your thoughts and ideas because they don't assume you have an agenda of some sort. So I think it is very different. But I think one of the reasons why you see the statistics that you see is very different than being a vice president or in the C-suite of a corporation. Board members serve on boards for 30 years, 40 years. And so changing that out is not necessarily just generational. And so it's going to take many years. I mean, I sit in boardrooms with men that have been on these boards for 30 years, 35 years. We have these wonderful dinner celebrations celebrating their 40th year on the board. My father-in-law was a founder of Home Depot. He's just leaving the board of Home Depot after serving on the board for 46 years. I mean, and so you have these kinds of things. So it's very different than changing over the management offices, because managers serve maybe in their management positions for 5 years or 10 years, and they turnover, but there isn't as much turnover in the boardroom. It's changing a little bit, but I think it's going to take a whole lot more time than what we're used to seeing, and we don't have patience as women. So.
What do you think, John?
Well, it's interesting. I agree with almost everything that's been said, virtually everything. One of the observations I have is that the results, it reminds me of looking at the United States scores compared to the rest of the world in K through 12. It's dismal. It almost brings tears to your eyes. And in the higher education, the United States has is at the top of colleges and universities, with great university like we're on campus of right now at Stanford. But the results, although there have been a 50% increase in some of the categories that we saw in the Catalyst research, it's still a dismal number. So I'm saddened to see that. I think from what's happening, from my perspective, in working with various boards to recruit new board members, I'm working with 2 boards now that specifically want to recruit female board members. And I think in both cases, they're doing so because they're embarrassed. They don't have proper representation. Both of these companies are over $5 billion U.S. Revenue, so these are large, relatively large companies. And in both cases, in the C-suite, they only have 1 female officer. And both companies have no female board members. So I think they've come to the conclusion that they're really embarrassed about their circumstances. One of these companies primarily serves consumer markets, and it's appalling to me to look at it and say, it's highly likely that more than 50% of your products, maybe a lot higher than that, are purchased by women, and you have no women on your board. You don't have any insight into your customers, the people who are buying your products. So I think there is an embarrassment that's driving some of this. Some of it is Sarbanes-Oxley and getting good government ratings by having more diversity on your board. But on that panel, we have 2, with Liz and Patty, we have 2 former CEOs and board members. So they've been board members and CEOs, so they have a unique perspective. And I think there are some differences, as Patty said. last of all, I think that women that I've seen brought on boards, if there's one or more board members already there, or if they're the first, I think it does change, as Patty said, it does change the culture of the boardroom almost immediately, in the first meeting. And one of the things that I hypothesize, and I'd be interested in the audience's reaction as well as my fellow panelists, is that I believe that, as Liz said, women bring more common sense, but I think, and this may fall into the common sense category under that umbrella, is that I think that women are much less likely to collude to fail with the group, in a group setting. We've all read about groupthink, and this happens at the corporate board level often, as it happens in our families, it happens in any relationship. But essentially, groupthink happens when there's hidden agreement in a group, on a board. Individually, if you talk to the individual members of the board, they'll say, gee, we really need to change this. Our CEO is no longer performing at the level we need. But when the board gets together as a group, they don't act on it, because in many cases they don't know that there's almost full agreement on something and nobody's willing to speak up. So I think many women are immediately willing to, even if they're brand new on a board, are immediately willing to test that and said, help me understand this. I'm hearing arguments for this and I'm struggling with this. Could I just test this? Does the rest of the board feel this way? And sometimes it's the obvious question. It's the elephant in the room, if you will. And I think female board members tend to be willing to ask the obvious questions that sometimes boards collude to fail because they will not address, and they won't even find out if they have hidden agreement. But in many cases, I'm convinced they have hidden agreement, and hence, a lot of really dysfunctional behavior we've seen on boards, from perhaps the subprime meltdown recently to WorldCom, to Enron, to the backdating scandals, et cetera. And you said, gee, these boards must have been asleep at the switch. And they were. And in many cases, if you ask the members of the boards now, did you think something was going on? They'd said yes, but they really didn't bring it to the board's attention because they weren't willing to raise their hand.
So, John, can I just add a point to that? I saw one interesting analysis. People looked at why did the backdating scandal happen, and why did it spread to so many companies, particularly in this area. And so they think, well, was there a group of advisors that were pushing that, whatever. And the closest thing they can find is that there's a lot of interlocking directorates among all these companies. So Joe was on one company. He says, on this other company I'm on the board of, I told them that this was a great thing and maybe we should do it. And I think it's the same kind of thing, only taken to the whole industry as opposed to just an individual corporation, where you have these people, they all know each other. And if Joe's doing it, well, then maybe we should do it. And, you might have some qualms about it, but, he says it's okay, or they're doing it there. So, they all know each other. And I think these bad practices can spread that way, not just within a company, but within an industry as well.
Yeah, it almost becomes a viral process. And I think it certainly happened here in Silicon Valley with backdating, but as we found out, the virus had spread far beyond technology companies and affected companies in a lot of other sectors as well.
So it used to be that CEOs were in a significant position to hire board members. Talk a little bit about how that's changed, and what are the hiring bodies looking for in terms of what they're looking for in terms of board members? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it is changing dramatically, and it's really moving away from the CEO being responsible for identifying board members and recruiting board members to a more objective committee-based approach, and I think it's done different in a lot of the different companies I'm involved in. But I find that the CEO is kind of the last vote in now as opposed to the first vote in, so there's kind of a full vetting of the candidates in advance, which I think is making a big difference. And I would say that the single thing, I've searched for 9 board members in the last year for various companies that I'm involved in, and there's only been one common thread in all 9 of those. They look for situational things and technical expertise and financial skills and what have you. But I think the single common thread that I find is that they look for people who come to the table with an informed opinion. They've taken the time to inform themselves, but with a willingness to be convinced of something else with the right compelling data. So they want you to come, they want you to be informed, but they want you to be willing to be influenced. And I think that's different than when you're running a business where they want you to make the decision and they want you to take the risk and they want you to go forward. And that's the single common thread when I look at all of the things that I think differentiates people that instantly you say, that's a good board member. They do the work, they come informed, but they're open to be influenced.
I would say the other thing that I've seen is that I think it used to be people were looking for people like themselves, and people they get along with. But I think now boards are much more sophisticated, and they're looking for people who may have different perspectives. And honestly, I think they want someone who will hold them to the straight and narrow. And that, and I see particularly when lawyers get on boards, they want someone who's going to make sure that they're big on compliance, that they have a different mindset on some of these issues. And it's both technical expertise, but I think also ethical standards, that it protects them as well. If you have someone who knows what they're doing, that knows what good corporate governance is, that's willing to insist upon it, that will work with whoever's advising to ensure that you're doing all the right things, and that protects all of the board members. So I see that that's something else that I think is different than it has been in the past.
Now, I think a couple of other things that boards are looking for now, and I agree with what's been said, but I've seen boards recently really go through a careful process of defining the skill sets that they need to round out the board. That rather than, gee, I got this buddy and I'd like to bring him on, it's what are we lacking? And situations such as John described where you have a consumer products company that doesn't have anybody on the board who's really the likely customer for most of those. Those are the types of things I see companies looking for. Specific expertise that fills out their board. I can't let the opportunity go by without saying, too, that if any of you are financial experts, you have a lifelong career because boards are very, very desperate for people who are strong in the financial area and who are willing to take on the daunting responsibility of audit committee roles. People are bailing off of audit committees whenever they can, and there's no reason to. It's not rocket science, and I don't even think it's scary as long as you have the expertise and bring the process to bear that makes sure that the company indeed has solid systems in the financial area. But for sure, if you're one of those, don't be bashful about raising your hand and looking for those opportunities. I think another characteristic that for me makes a board a very worthwhile place to be and of benefit to the company is when you have a group of people to whom the CEO can come and lay out key strategic challenges and questions and draw from the wisdom and experience of the group. Being a CEO can be a very lonely role. And sometimes there are issues and challenges that it's wonderful if you have a board environment where the CEO can come and say, here's a big fat question that I've been wrestling with, and I would really like to get the benefit of the people in this room. And if you have the right atmosphere on a board and the right diversity of experience, which again I think we can contribute to, that can be of great benefit to the company. And I know when I'm looking at board opportunities, I look for an environment that I think is going to be just that.
Evelyn, just tag on a couple of quick items, but one, Patty mentioned that CEOs are in the past essentially invited most of the people to the board with, a telephone call or maybe a dinner to meet the rest of the people. And those days are essentially totally over, I think, because of nominating committees and Sarbanes-Oxley and having independent directors on the nominating committee, no insiders. And most of the clients I see now are doing a thoughtful job of an audit of what type of competencies are needed. What relates to our business strategy? Are we expanding in Latin America? Do we really understand the Hispanic requirements for our products and services? Those types of things. So there's been a huge move after Sarbanes-Oxley, the first 3 or 4 years, I think we're in the 5th year now, right, Deborah?
Yeah.
It seems like only yesterday, but the first 3 years especially were boards were totally overwhelmed with compliance. And I think most public companies have these compliance systems in place, Sarbanes-Oxley, so they're compliant. So the audit committee did the heavy lifting, and and they got that done. Now I see a huge you're bringing forward of what was put on the back burner, and that was the advisory role, and that's exactly what Liz spoke to. And CEOs do like to visit a person, when they're in their city, or if they're on a different geography, or if they're relatively local, have breakfast, have a cup of coffee, and said, listen, you have experience, Liz, in building a company, or Patty, you have experience in selling your company to a larger corporation. Tell me about this. And the CEOs aren't asking for permission, in my experience, to do that job, but they are asking for advice on how you may have handled something. So I'm a real advocate for a competency-based approach for recruiting people to boards, and I think it's a real advantage for women that there's a focus on competencies and corporations doing audits of what they really need on their board to be representative of what their business strategy is.
So how do you make yourself more marketable? How do you make yourself more prepared for a board position? So in some ways, tell us what you know now that you wish you had known maybe 20 years ago to position yourself better and make yourself more marketable for board positions. Come on, tell us.
I'll throw 2 things out. One is to broaden your skills. Take the initiative, no matter what your particular functional expertise area is. If you're vice president of marketing for a company and have the marketing sales roll down pat, make sure you are well grounded in finance, because everybody on that board has got to understand the business reality. So make sure you broaden yourself out as early as you get the opportunity to. And the other one I would say is raise your hand. If you have interest in being on a board, raise your hand. Talk to your CEO about it. Talk to the members of your corporation's board. Get a good line on some executive recruiters who specialize in the
Did you bring cards,
in
John?
in the board area, and get your name and resume in front of them. Don't sit there and wait for somebody to come and tap you on the shoulder, because there are plenty of people looking for good board members, as we've heard, and get yourself out in front of them.
And I would say there are a lot of resources out there now. There's this group in this area called the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs and Executives. And for instance, they do a 3-part training for women that are interested in serving on public and private boards. So, and also for here at Stanford, not to puff Stanford, but I've spoken at the Stanford Directors College, which Stanford had. It's very popular now to have training sessions for directors, but Stanford was really the one who started that. So, so there are lots of opportunities, I think, to get more formal training and credentialing, which honestly I think for women and minorities, sometimes having that credentialing is more important than if you're a man. But I agree with everything that's been said in terms of having that expertise, and I think not only raising your hand, but the thing that I see is people who follow through. I think there are lots of people who are willing to volunteer to do things, but the people that are successful, as we talked about, as Patty was just saying, these are the people that come and they're prepared and they're informed, and they get things done. And I think that's something that's it's hard to overlook. And the other thing I would say is, since I'm an advocate for nonprofits, is not to overlook nonprofits. Nonprofits are over 7% of the gross national product of the United States. So it's a big sector of the marketplace, and a lot of nonprofits are huge businesses. I mean, Stanford, we have about $5 billion a year in operations between our 2 hospitals and the university. We have an endowment of $20 billion that's professionally managed. I advise 4 boards that are just Stanford boards. These are big companies, and for instance, the last 2 chairs of the board of the Stanford Hospital, which is a large operation, have been women, and the CEO is a woman. So it's probably not a coincidence that a lot of women got started in nonprofits. But for instance, the Stanford board, which is meeting today and tomorrow, is like a who's who of the Silicon Valley and corporate America. So you get on one of these boards, you do the things that we've talked about. You're on the audit committees, or you volunteer to serve, and you're prepared, and you show that you're a good collaborative board member. And these are the contacts that you have and the opportunities that you have to move above and beyond if you went to the nonprofit world into one where they actually pay you to be a board member. Since I've served on 7 boards, and only one of them has been a for-profit, so it would be nice to be paid sometimes for all the work that you put in.
Yeah, I just don't think you can underscore enough the need for the basic financial skills. Yeah. I don't think that many boards welcome someone in who cannot read a basic income statement or balance sheet and understand the cause and effect. That when you make this kind of decision, how is it going to impact earnings for our shareholders? How is it going to impact our balance sheet? And I think it doesn't really matter what your subject matter expertise is, because I really grew up in more strategic planning, sales, and marketing, but it was really, forcing myself to learn the financial side of the business that, has now unfortunately found me in 2 audit committee chair seats and serving on another audit committee, and turned me overnight into a financial expert. But it is really critical, because a significant amount of your responsibility for shareholders is signing off on the financials of the company, signing off on the filings that the company makes. And it's really important that you read that information, but you understand it. You really understand what it means. And that's what you're really looking out for the shareholders. When you're looking out for shareholder value and shareholder return, it comes down to economics for shareholders. And so, I would underscore that. But I would also support the whole notion of nonprofits. I mean, nonprofits are a great way to learn basic board skills, the collaborative decision-making processes and the communication between board members, resolving conflicts, because when you have more than one person in a room, you're not always going to agree on things. It's the way it is. And I think you can really get that experience in a lower risk environment. I'm not diminishing the role of nonprofits. I think they're a very, very important part of our economic infrastructure as a country, but I think it's not as risky from a basic liability perspective. And
not as likely to get sued.
Well, yeah, I was trying to be nice, but the lawyer can say that. And so I would really not underestimate that. I think that's a really important place to learn. And then you need a big old bucket of patience. I mean, because serving in the boardroom is very different. It's not as action-oriented. It's more dialogue and discussion and moving from really doing to thinking and advising. It's just a real different, it's a transition. It's a real different role. So.
True. Just a couple of suggestions here again to echo comments that have already been made. I think if you're preparing yourself to be on a board, you want to be on maybe you're on a board, you want to be on more boards. I think you should think of yourself as a product. You're marketing yourself. So how do you market yourself? And we've had some good suggestions. And I do think that an interesting place to look is at your university or private school that perhaps you were a part of, either in high school or even in college. So it's interesting because you generate another ecosystem for yourself, perhaps with officers, CEOs of public companies, and they can see you at work, and that's how you impress people. So I think of yourself as as a product, and so create exposure for yourself. Meet people in the search business. Volunteer to be a part in nonprofits. And universities are excellent. Just to give you a quick anecdote, this past week I was referencing a woman. I'm sure she doesn't mind me mentioning her name. Her name is Robin Farrakhan. She was previously with Mercer Consulting. She sold her company, her executive compensation company, to Mercer, and she just recently left them. She lives in Southern California. She was a Duke University undergraduate, and she's been on the Duke Board of Trustees for almost 4 years now. And to reference her, I was talking with, she's had one corporate board. She was on a board of Candle Corporation before it was sold to IBM. She was head of the comp committee there, but that was a number of years back. So as a part of referencing her, I had a chance to speak to Janet Hill, who is head of the audit committee for Duke University. And Janet happens to be on the board of Wendy's, Dean Foods, and Sprint Nextel. So Janet was very impressed, and they had asked Robin to take over. You remember a couple of years ago, Duke had the very, upsetting and saddening experience with the, I guess, lacrosse team. And as a part of that, they asked Robin to do a corporate governance audit for the university and for the president, for the Board of Trustees. And Janet was very impressed. And Janet has been really a professional board member for a number of years. She served on, I think, 15 public boards. So she has a very statured point of view. By the way, her son is Grant Hill, plays with the Phoenix Suns now, I guess, and played at Duke. And her husband is Calvin Hill, all-pro with the Dallas Cowboys. But she was a kick. But additionally, I had a chance to speak to Rick Wagner, the chairman and CEO of General Motors. He's also he's the vice chairman of the Board of Trustees at Duke, and he also was very impressed with Robin. So just an example of how Robin, being on a university board, has met and impressed people that are on numerous other corporate boards. And as a marketing platform, it's just an example of how you can do that. Obviously, it's hard to start there, but I think each of you, as you think about that, can really hone your skills, as Patty says. And lastly, a lot of people, public corporations, talk about D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance. And I think since Sarbanes-Oxley, boards get sued a lot these days. There are a lot of derivative lawsuits. People tag along, and Deborah can talk about that much better than I can. But they tag along lawsuits. But as it turns out, I'm a big believer that the best way to mitigate risk, if you are on a public or private board, is to be engaged. And if you are engaged, that means reading the board materials before the morning that you're going, or the evening before you're going to the meeting. Or as some people used to say, they're reading the board materials as they're flying to the board meeting. And that doesn't meet the hurdle rate these days. So the only way to mitigate the risk, I think, is to be engaged. And to be engaged, you have to have basic financial skills because, as Patty said, you're asked to sign off as a board, as a public company board member. You're asked to sign off on a lot of documents. And you should have a basic understanding financially of what those documents say. Now, I think almost nobody understands everything they say, but there's a lot of bureaucracy in those documents. But I would recommend that you can mitigate that by having yourself basically financially prepared and having that competence.
Just about to graduate from the GSB, and I wanted to know if you had any advice on what age women should start to look for their first position on a board.
I told them beforehand if they didn't answer, I'd cold call. So.
Well, if you haven't started already, no. but I think if you're talking about getting a foothold in terms of starting on no-profit boards, I think you're ready. And I think that you can start small, but work your way up. And I don't think it's too soon. You have the financial expertise that are a lot of smaller nonprofits that are doing wonderful things could really use. And so I think that's an easy way to get started and something that then can help you build the experience. But I defer to John, who's the expert.
Yeah. Well, I think most top-tier grad schools of business, such as GSB, certainly require you to have at least 3 or 4 years of business experience between undergraduate and beginning your master's, your MBA program. And I think given that likely places you, unless you're a bit of a prodigy, it typically places you in your sort of later 20s or early 30s. But I think that's a good time to start. And I echo Deborah's comments. I think it's a great time to start. The other thing, too, is if you are entering the corporate world, it might be worthwhile to really put a lot of attention to getting your career started, getting a lot of traction. Maybe you're going back to the firm you were with, before. Let's say you were in financial services, you were with Goldman Sachs. You're going back to Goldman after you receive your MBA. That'd be terrific. But getting some traction in your career, because the best way, I think, to make yourself available for the best opportunities is that people recognize that you are moving in your career. You perhaps have received one or more promotions, and that you have a level of competence about something that you can really talk about. And I think Patty and Liz talked about that with their first comments.
Yeah, a couple of things. I agree that that you have to establish yourself as a very competent, experienced person, and you're probably not likely to be in that position the first year out of the B school. So, yeah, focus on the best career you can have and the greatest success in the fullest sense of the word that you can have. But I think the networking can start right from the beginning. And depending on what company you're in, if you do have access to board members of that company and have a chance to just network with them in a mentoring type way with your CEO, do it. Get started on that. I would like to be a contrarian, though. Is that okay?
No.
I have served for the past 8 years on a not-for-profit board. They have a budget of about $65 million. I'm passionate about this organization and what it does, and it's superbly run nonprofit organization delivering healthcare services to hundreds of thousands of women mainly. But I would not recommend as a likely step to get yourself to the corporate boardroom of a public company serving on a not-for-profit board. I think service on a not-for-profit board is a wonderful thing to do, and if the situation is such that it's a networking opportunity, that might be the case. But an awful lot of not-for-profit boards are not populated with lots of people who might be those networking opportunities. As I said, I think it's wonderful service, but if you want to get into the for-profit board world, you've got to keep your sights very clearly on that, in my opinion.
Yeah. And by the way, I noticed there are a lot of, and these are for men and women, obviously, networking events for new grad students or grad students while you are students. And I think I would be a contrarian here too. I would think here again, think about yourself, as a product. You're marketing yourself, and going where everybody else is going may not serve you very well to quote unquote networking events. And generally, people sort of have fun and there's a nice social interaction there. But I've never been convinced that these networking events really help you network. And I think that's done better by sort of developing a one-on-one strategy of people who can give you advice. It could be other women, could be, obviously could be men, but trying to get advice and let people know what your interests are, because sometimes people don't know, and especially let your boss know what your interest is, because they can nominate you up if they know this is part of your own development, and they will see it in hopefully your company's best interest to have you serve on a board of another company. And it could be a really important part of your own development. So I think try to get the support and sponsorship of your superiors.
Is a private company board a path to a public company board position?
Yeah, first of all, that's when for the women that I mentor, that's actually the number one recommendation I make for them. Because a significant way to get in a public company board is be in a private company that goes public. I mean, that's actually the easiest way. I mean, and there's a lot of those companies that are at that stage where they're ready to go public. They're looking for some independence. The investors are dominant in the boardroom, and they're looking to reconstruct the board coincident with an IPO, and that's a perfect opportunity, I think, for women to find a seat at the table. So I think that if there's a private company board opportunity, I think you do start to develop the skills. They're not all transferable into the public company environment, honestly, but I think there's enough that are that I think it's a worthwhile use of your time. And I've done both public and private company boards. I find them to be equally invigorating and equally interesting learning opportunities, and in boards, I think that's really what keeps you going as a board member. You don't build great wealth being in boardrooms. In boardrooms, it's more about the intellectual stimulation, I think, and you get that equally, in my opinion, in both the private and the public.
Yeah. My recommendation generally is that whether you're interested in private or public, and let me ask you, Patty, when we recruited you to in the late 90s, were you on any public boards prior to that?
I was, yeah. Vantive
Oh,
and
Vantive.
Earthline.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So, but after that, you became very high profile. And
John catapulted me.
very much into van. But just a general, whether it's your first board or your 10th or 15th board, I have some simple guidelines, and these sound probably a bit trite and worn, but I really believe in them. First of all, I think it's about the people. Do you like the people on this board, and do you think you can learn something from them? You can always ask yourself, can I add value? And undoubtedly, there will be boards that you can add value. Sometimes there could be hundreds or even thousands of companies where you could add value, particularly, as Liz said, if you're a financial expert. And if you're a female financial expert, you have a lot of opportunities. So, how do you filter those? So I would recommend, can you have fun? And can you learn something from the people there? And that's the networking opportunity, I think, for you. Are there people you would like to get to know in another industry segment, in another geography, or they have a different cultural perspective on something that you would like to get exposure to? I think that's great. And then ultimately, do you have passion for it? And I think we've heard 3 people on the panel said they're on boards for nonprofits where they have a lot of passion for what they're doing. And in some cases, that's helpful in catapulting them to a public situation. In some cases, it's not. But I think it's clear that if you load yourself up with nonprofits and then a public opportunity comes available, you need to be prepared to step down, because you probably you can easily get overcommitted based on boards. Patty was talking just before our panel discussion. Patty had an estimate of what your Patty, you may speak to the average number of days you think that you're spending on a public board.
Yeah, I think if you're engaged, I think as we've talked about, that's a real critical part. I think the estimate is about 25 days a year is about what I spend in each of my boards, and that's inclusive of reading documents and going to board meetings and strategic planning sessions and interviewing new board members and interviewing new audit partners and going to your board training to keep yourself fresh. And so it's about 25 days a year. So you have to really think about how does that fit in with all the other things that you have in your life. And it's not 25 days that they're willing to work around your calendar. It's typically more 25 days that's around a calendar that exists. So, so I think you have to think about that.
And with public boards, sometimes there's a simple hurdle that people typically can trip over very easily is check the board calendar. All public corporations, virtually always publish out at least a year, and most now 2 years out, what the board dates are. And make sure you don't have any conflicts. So if you find out you can only go to 1/3 of the board meetings, you're conflicted to really consider that board. So as Patty said, boards, unless it's a very small company, are not going to adjust their board meetings to accommodate your schedule. So especially when you're on more than one board, that becomes, can become a very serious knockout factor that a lot of people don't quite consider. That people frequently look at conflicts of, are we conflicted on products, intellectual property? In Sarbanes-Oxley, there are specific rules, as you may know, about if I'm a relatively large customer, or if I'm a large supplier, I'm conflicted. I could be on your board, but I can't be an independent director. So there are a lot of filters that you might need to do as you move your career along, and you're asked to be on more public boards.
I found the conversation at the beginning about roles really interesting, and talking about the role of women and as minorities or as newcomers. Are there points, though, that the roles become binding and that you're typecast on the board as the contrarian or sort of the voice of a minority? And if so, how do you all handle that, or have you seen that play out on boards that you've been on?
Well, I guess I would say, obviously, if you're the first woman on the board, in this case, and even more so if you're coming into a group that's been working together for a long time, an all-male group, right out of the chute, you are different, as was discussed, and that may bring some benefit that you maybe listen to just because they're curious as to what you're going to say, number one. And number two, that you don't have the hesitation to say something that somebody else might disagree with, because you just want to get to the most intelligent thing to do, and there are not other ties that bind you. But in my experience, it goes to two directions. John mentioned, check out before you go on a board to try to get, it's hard up front, but to try to get a sense of whether you think you'd like working with these people. That's really important. Is the chemistry, the first pass, does the chemistry feel right? Because in the end, whether you get stuck in a niche where she's going to raise trouble every time she opens her mouth, or whether you then become accepted as someone whom they really respect and whose opinion is going to bring value, will depend on the nature of how you build relationships with those who are already there when you arrive. And if the chemistry feels right before you jump on board, chances are, in my experience, that as you begin to make your points and have your impact on the group, and they start to nod their heads and say, yeah, this makes sense, that you will be building relationships too that will cause you no longer to be the odd person in the room. You become part of a new fabric, hopefully a stronger and better fabric.
Yeah, I would say that's the women I've seen that have been successful, the most successful on boards have done exactly that, and they're listened to maybe initially because they're outsider, but then they're listened to because they're respected, because they've added value to the discussion, because they're collegial. And I've seen it fail when a woman has come in and been very strident and antagonistic, and she may be listened to the first couple of times, then honestly not after that. It doesn't last long on the board. So, I mean, I think it's very person dependent. But overall, I think most of the women I've seen on boards have been highly competent, highly qualified, and are really listened to because they have something to say in the final analysis.
Yeah, and I think you had a quote, and I can't remember who it was from, that you don't want to get into the boardroom just because you're a girl. And I would, on the contrary, say that's not a bad reason to get in the boardroom the first time. And you can be a little bit of a secret weapon because people kind of underestimate you. They think you're in there because you're the girl. And then pretty soon they realize that what you're saying makes sense. And the questions that you ask are informed and intelligent. And so I think that sometimes you can have a greater impact because the expectation is so low. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, but it's a great thing to take advantage of. And there's such low expectations. And I know, now that I've served on as many boards as I have, I know for a fact that in a couple of occasions I was chosen because I was a girl. And they wanted a girl with certain qualifications. But in both of those situations now, in one case I'm the lead independent director and I'm having great impact in that boardroom. And I know I was the girl when I first went in. And I'm still the only girl, but I'm having great impact. And in the other one, I'm chairing the audit committee, and I'm having great impact in changing the way the company looks at itself from a financial processes perspective. So I would say, that's how you make change, is you get in however you can get in, and then you do what you do. And so, don't let that be a reason not to do it.
Yeah. And I think there are some traps that you can fall into, if male or female, by the way, but I think women are particularly susceptible because women that join public boards especially want to have an impact, and they're very anxious to. But some of the traps are, one is the so-called, this came from the Enron, the smartest person in the room syndrome, trying to prove how smart you are. And I think that's a trap that should be fairly obvious. The other one is taking up too much airtime early, when you join any group, for example, but especially when you join a public board. And spend some time listening early on. And most boards have a training or briefing session for new board members. So you learn the business, you meet the officers. If they don't, they should. And you may request that if they don't have a formal program, so that you get briefings on the business and each of the operations of the business, meet the CFO, et cetera, general counsel. But I think listening and the real fabric is I think a couple of people have used that term of a board, of an effective board, I think, are the soft factors. How well do people work together? It's not how old they are, how long they've been on the board. It really is the soft factors. Do these people work together well? And is the chemistry good? And if you listen a little more than speak early on, I think you can get calibrated to how you can make your points and not fall into one of these traps of the smartest, trying to be the smartest person in the room, or taking too much airtime, trying to prove a point of your expertise, and try to use your expertise, but also try to impress people that you have a broad-based understanding of the business of the board that you're on.
This question is particularly aimed at the three women on the panel. I am still feeling a little bit conflicted about the data that we saw at the beginning, and trying to imagine myself as a female board member digesting that. I'm curious to hear about your perspectives on advocating for increasing the number of women on boards that you currently participate on, and if it's relevant, if you'd be willing to speak to whether there have been women who have sort of spoken up for you as you have attained the positions that you're in right now.
Wow. Wow. Looks like you get to start. You
Yeah,
very good question. I think you have to be careful about the timing of the advocation. I think it's not a matter of do you advocate or not, but you have to be very careful about the timing, because this isn't something that changes overnight, and you don't want to be known as the woman that's about women's issues in the boardroom, or they stop listening, frankly. So I think it takes time and kind of maneuvering and gaining your influence, and I have been fortunate enough to have a woman that has been a great mentor of mine and has spoken up for me, and was greatly influential in securing a board seat for me that I now enjoy, and has been great at helping me be successful as I've made my way into that boardroom. So I've been very fortunate there. But I think it doesn't happen overnight, and I think you have to play it from a timing perspective at the time when people are going to be open to your message.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think the most important thing is to be heard. So you have to pick your moment and pick your time. But when I consult and when I'm advising, I actually can be more of an advocate, I think, than as when I'm a board member. But I think in many instances, it's needed in terms of the diversity of viewpoints that it brings. And I think, John was making some good points about how silly is it to have a company that, sells most of its products to women, or a significant market share, to Hispanics, and yet you don't have any representation of that on the board. So a lot of it is in the way you bring it up. Not that we have to have women, but I think it'd be useful to have some different perspectives that will help us in our business, as opposed to, we just need more women, or some similar statement. But I actually think it's important. I never had any women mentors in my career. I had some wonderful male mentors. But I try to be a mentor to other women, and I think, and to other people too. But I think that can be very important.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult question. I personally have not ever had a woman as a mentor, so I can't speak to that one. I have been on boards. Of the 6 boards I've been on, I've had another woman on the board twice. And the other 4 not. I have to keep going back, though, to the issue of competency. And every board needs the most competent people it can get on the board. And I think the challenge is to figure out how to influence the search criteria to make sure that net will include looking for very competent women. And I don't know, maybe, John, you have more sense of this because you're dealing with the companies that are actually out doing that. It may be that you make the suggestion quietly to the CEO or to the chairman of the search committee or something like that, rather than, it may be how you make that suggestion too. There may be opportunities to suggest it that will be more effective than saying, should we put this on the list?
Yeah, I would say that something probably not popular to say, but I've been, as a person leading the searches, very frustrated by the pool of candidates. And so, I kind of always try to finagle my way in to look at the short list of resumes a little earlier than everyone else, so I can try to have some influence. And I've been frankly disappointed when we really try to match the spec, which is exactly what Liz is saying, to the actual requirement, that the pool of women kind of willing to serve with the qualifications is much smaller than I would have thought at this point in my life it would be.
And which, again, when you're at the right place, get your name out there. Make sure that everybody looking knows you're willing and able.
You see that same thing.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a real advocate, as Liz, to use Liz's term, of a competency approach. And I think, my personal belief is that that will serve women much more effectively in terms of putting the numbers we saw to put that curve much steeper than we see it. Although it's doubled, there's still minuscule numbers, that are embarrassing to everyone, I think. But the competencies that women bring to boards, public and private, are very impressive. And I think if you are a woman on a board, I think you might have more impact by focusing on the competency and not focusing on we need another woman on the board. In some cases, perhaps you do. But the competency approach, I think, my hunch is we'll have better results.
Do your networking and bring other qualified women to the attention of the search committee and of the recruiting firm. Get their names on the list.
For those who are financially competent but not necessarily likely to be the outside financial expert, what other skill sets do you most commonly see boards recruiting for?
Well, let me just take a stab at that. Recently, I've seen a lot of boards that seem to have needs in executive compensation, to be on the committee, and in some cases to head a compensation committee. So, understanding compensation trends and executive compensation, by and large, requires someone with strong analytic skills, and to be able to really understand what surveys are telling you and what the market is telling you. So sometimes they're two different things. But so I would say that a competency that I've frequently seen is, other than financial expert, is people that have international experience, that are multilingual, that have perhaps lived or operated businesses have been located outside of the U.S. Hence the globalization of the economy, which is very obvious to everyone. But I think a lot of boards are looking around and says, we don't have anybody on that board that's ever lived outside the United States. We don't have anybody from Asia. We don't have anybody from Latin America or from Europe. So I think people that have international exposure is high on the list.
And I think remind yourself that you can serve that role for an internationally based company. So it doesn't require you to go live in Latin America. It requires you to seek out a company that's headquartered in Europe or Asia or something and be that international expert and bring. And I think that is. I serve on the board of Korn Ferry. I'm not supposed to say that with Heidrich here. And that is something that we see often now in our board searches, where they are looking for, foreign entities looking for U.S.-based people that to them look international. So, yeah. Yeah.
Please join me in thanking them for their time and obviously expertise.